also be able to share it with you if you want to be able to have it also.
Okay, that
So,
would be great.
okay, I think I got it. Yeah. Okay, so I like to play this game, and this is just because while we wait for people to come on, then I like people to realize that, like, even though we're like people that lecture and have doctorates, that we're just like normal people and we can have fun. So, are you up to playing my game with me?
I am very scared, but go ahead.
I don't understand why people are always scared. Okay, the game is really easy, and I should have asked my office manager, who is Jamaican. I should have asked her. I need to get a good name for my folks that come from the Caribbean when I interview them. I call it, okay, so it's just general black love, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it is very easy. All you have to do, I'm going to give you a category, and all you have to do is name 5 things in that category in 10 seconds.
Oh my goodness me. I don't think I'll be good at this, but go ahead.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. You will be fine. Hold on. I'm going to put my stopwatch on. Okay, let me reset my stopwatch. And okay, and here's the thing. You can't say any filler words. So in my Yankee accent, we say oh. So I don't know, as a Jamaican woman, what other filler words you might you might have. No filler words. You just have to say the 5 things and go. Okay? So your category is Caribbean women freedom fighters. Give me 5 Caribbean women freedom fighters. Go.
Nana of the Jamaican Maroons, Mary Ann Reid, Mary Prince, Sally Bassett, Letitia Gohagan. I did, didn't I?
You were good. You were good. Like you had a steady pace until right
Yes.
Well, thank you for participating in my game.
Okay, then. Is there another question?
Okay, I do have another one. Okay.
I'll try not to say or
Okay. So again, you got to name 5 things, 10 seconds. Your category is fruits of the Caribbean, but ones that do not grow in Jamaica. Fruits of the Caribbean that do not grow in Jamaica. Go. So no.
Bene.
I love it.
Bene.
Okay, let's do it again. Let's do it a different way. Okay, this is the last one. Okay, this is the last one. I think this will be easier. I'm sorry. Okay. Give me 5 fruits that grow in Jamaica. Go.
Otaiti apple, pineapple, oranges, grapefruit, and believe it or not, we do grow strawberries.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
There is also jackfruit.
No, I did know jackfruit, but I didn't know strawberries. Oh, wow. Interesting.
Remember that Jamaica has varied environments and weather. So up in the hills, people do grow strawberry.
My colleague, she says guava. Okay, so this is my colleague, Dr. Oh, and Alethea says mango, of course.
Yes. I didn't want to the most obvious ones like mango
Red
and
fruit.
yes.
But
Well,
that,
mhm.
thank you for participating in my little
That was
game.
fun, even though I almost failed.
No, everybody wins. It's just my way of when we get on, it takes a second for Facebook to send this signal out and let people know that we're on. So it's my way of, just doing something fun.
It's a good one. I must copy that.
Yes, please do. Please do.
I have a radio show every week, every Saturday.
Really?
Yes, it's called Talking History.
Oh, wow. Okay, is it online so we
Yes.
can get it here in the US?
It's on Facebook. I have many US listeners. It's on Facebook. It's on YouTube, nationwide 90 FM radio station. It's live.
Talking history. Okay.
Yes. It would be 10 to 12 your time.
Okay.
9 to 11 Jamaica time.
Okay. Good afternoon.
That's my way of taking history to the public because too few people are studying history.
That is very true. So I want to jump in and start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I'm a licensed psychologist and executive director at A Healing Paradigm, which is based in Muskogee Territory, which is also known as Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. I am so pleased and honored and really humbled that my guest today said yes to my request to be able to interview her. The first time I heard Dr. Verene Shepherd in Guyana, she lit the entire room on fire. There was like 300 people in there and everybody was like, reparations. I mean, she lit it up. And so I am just so honored to have you. Dr. Verene Shepherd is the director of the Center of Reparations Research at the University of West Indies, Moana, which is based in, I'm sure you know, in Jamaica. And so, Dr. Shepherd, thank you so much for accepting this invitation.
I'm really honored to have been asked, to have been invited. Thank you very much for having me.
Yay. And I told you about my student, your former student, long time ago that did an internship. I see that she's on. She's a doctor now, Dr. Kendra McCrae, and she's got a PhD in history. And so, kind of looking at another end of, I know that you focus on like Caribbean women's history, and look at reparations. She actually looks at African American Black women freedom fighters, and specifically Black Power movements. So
excellent.
So it's
I'll talk to her.
Well, I want to just jump in, and I heard you say, so I was listening to a couple of your lectures, and you said something that is a little bit different than what I've heard before. So people talk about reparations all the time. You use the term reparatory justice. Tell us what reparatory justice means.
I think we use that because reparatory justice is part of restorative justice. It's about repairing a harm that was done. So the justice part is because it was criminal action. And therefore, if an individual or a state engages in criminal activity, because the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans and chattel enslavement have been categorized as crimes against humanity. Mm-hmm. So if it's a crime, then some aspect of justice is required. But reparatory, because it is repairing that which you did, the wrong that you did, the harm that you did. And in the context of the Caribbean and Black people, in the context of African people, some people say people of African descent, but a lot of us prefer just Africans, because how do you stop being African? Because somebody stole you away and put you somewhere else, you know? Sure. So we speak in terms of Africans. So the crime was kidnapping Africans, transporting them in inhumane conditions across the Middle Passage, scattering them across the world, and subjecting them to unspeakable work, unspeakable punishments when they resisted and said, we want to be free. So there are people who call this whole thing the maangamizi, which is a word for African Holocaust, the African Holocaust, or Ma'angamizi. There were people who were saying the Ma'afa before, but now I think Africans have been using now the Ma'angamizi,
Maangamizi.
the African Holocaust. If so that is the crime that we're saying needs to be repaired because it has not yet been repaired. Yes, there was emancipation, but emancipation was not accompanied by any strategy, structure to enable the newly freed people to make a life wherever they were, because they were not taken back to where they were from at emancipation or the passing of the act to say chattel slavery was over. So Caribbean countries, the Americas, where people of African descent live or where African people live, African people are still one of the most marginalized groups in the world, the most discriminated against. All that needs repair. So the term we use is reparatory justice.
Maangamizi. Okay, you taught me something new today. What language does that come from?
Sister Esther tells me Swahili.
Okay. Okay. Maangamizi. Maangamizi.
Yes.
Maangamizi.
Yes,
I
but you
got
can
it.
look it up. You can look it up because it perhaps comes from other African languages as well, even though she was saying to me Swahili.
I love that. I love that. How do you, okay, so this just popped into my head. How do you respond to folks that, because there's this kind of, it's not new, but you hear this kind of comeback all the time when we talk about the transatlantic trade in human beings and this being a crime against humanity. Folks are constantly saying, well, Africans enslaved people, and, enslavement has been something historically that has been done in lots of communities. Why should we pay reparations for this? How do you respond to that?
I don't know why there's an either or conversation going on, actually, because anyone who participated in any criminal action must be held responsible. The issue, though, is that we must be careful. The transatlantic trafficking and African enslavement was an international project, a deliberate international project. I don't think any of us has ever seen an international crime that didn't have local collaborators. It should make the responsibility even greater on those who co-opted people into this crime, rather than lessen it and put the blame on the people who are co-opted. And remember also, those who study the trafficking, the kidnapping, what happened in Africa, and the actions of the Europeans will tell you that thousands and thousands of guns were transported to Africa to force compliance into this criminal action. There's a book that I've co-written with Professor Hilary Beckles. It's called Trading Souls. If you read Trading Souls, you will see the extent, you will see tables which track the number of guns taken to West Africa to ensure that Britain, for example, could secure captives for this trafficking. So remember who capitalized the enterprise? Remember who passed laws to make it legal for them? Remember who established industries all over Europe, for example, to make shackles, instruments of torture, tongue depressors? All of those manufacturing of those goods didn't take place in Africa.
Right.
Who had the ships? Who built the ships? Not one ship from Africa came to the Caribbean with enslaved Africans. So we must be clear. And who profited? Economic historians have said the net profit to Africa was zero. Yes, there were individual chiefs, individual people who may have gotten something from the enslavers because of it and gotten rich from it. But on average, when you look at the entire system, you cannot say go to Africa and leave Europeans alone. That would be so wrong. And African people must stop arguing this way.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. So thank you for that response. Normally I don't respond at all, but I loved your response. I'm wondering, in terms of like this history of reparations, talk about, has anybody ever been paid reparations for the loss of as a result of the transatlantic trade in human beings?
Well, if you're talking about Britain, for example, because we're talking about the CARICOM region, my work is in terms of the CARICOM states that have been disfigured by this Maangamizi. If we think of Britain, the most recent example would be the case of the Mau Mau of Kenya. That's the closest example to our case. And even so, they did not consider total payment, only those who managed to survive.
Yeah.
You know. But if we talk about historic reparation, then it's the compensation money that was paid to enslavers. Imagine those who committed the crime being compensated, being rewarded financially for having participated in this crime. But in the 1830s, in order for Britain to be able to get the Emancipation Act agreed to by those in Parliament who were enslavers, they had to agree to pay them for what they called property, but those were our ancestors. So 20 million pounds in cash and 27 million pounds sterling in unfree labor for 4 years extra after the act was passed is what we're talking about in terms of what the compensation money was to enslavers. So that was what was paid, and the names of the enslavers are there. If people go to UCL, the University College London website, they have a compensation study, you know, and you can find out the names of people who were beneficiaries. The planters in Jamaica, for example, received 6.2 million of the 20 million. And we would say according to 2019 values, that would be about 5.5 billion pounds sterling. And that's just the compensation portion. We can't monetize the crime anyway. It would be impossible. We don't even know the true figure of the people who were kidnapped, marched to the coast, died on the way, died in the barracoons, died on the trafficking across here, the Middle Passage, died on plantations, dumped in the sea because they didn't want to be seen by those who were patrolling the seas after 1808. So we will never know. The conservative estimate is 15 million, but we know it was many more millions.
Right.
And for Jamaica alone, where I'm located, 1.2 to 1.5 million people were trafficked. At the time of emancipation, 300,000 left. Now, if that's not genocide, I don't know what is. What happened to these ancestors, you know? So yes, I want to just, if I could quickly look at a sample of some of these people who were paid. I think your viewers might be interested. For example, the ancestor of former Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, because he had an ancestor who had a plantation in Western Jamaica. Gladstone of Guyana. I know we had met in Guyana. So John Gladstone, the father of 19th century Prime Minister William Gladstone, was paid 112,706 pounds in the 1830s for Africans he claimed he owned in Guyana. In fact, he claimed for 2,912 enslaved people across plantations in Jamaica and Guyana. And at 2019 value, that would be like 140 million pounds sterling. So we're talking about people who got so much money. James Blair, who was a member of parliament, was awarded 83,530 pounds, the equivalent today of 104 million, for 1,598 enslaved people. And women also were enslavers and claimed money. Some of the names are Maria Lang, Harriet Fraser Lucas, Caroline Robley, and the list goes on. We can track everyone, even people who people admired, poets that people admired. So many people were caught up in this, the Harewoods, the Lassells, George Orwell, Graham Greene, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, all these people, lots of people who are other people's icons and heroes or heroines. They got rich off the horrors inflicted on our ancestors.
But I was just calculating that because I know that the pound is higher than the dollar. So I'm just calculating that in terms of the dollar. 104 million pounds is 1.4 million US dollars. That sets you up. That sets you and your generations up for the future.
So when we talk about reparatory justice, we are saying not only did you harm our ancestors physically, but you got money, and that is on top of the wealth you already extracted from the labor of Africans. Remember that for hundreds of years, chattel enslavement was going on. So the compensation money is just one drop in the bucket of what they got, They extracted the wealth using the labor of enslaved Africans who produce sugar, coffee, and other crops, worked in their households, worked in their factories, worked in their establishments, their hotels, and so on. We're talking about a huge crime against humanity. It has to be repaired. And you're a psychologist. I think you study psychology, right? Am I right?
Yes.
You understand the mental agony, the psychological harm of enslavement on present generation.
Yes.
Because we have not been able to recover. There's been intergenerational transmission of poverty, whereas other people had intergenerational transmission of wealth. And I don't care what they say about it wasn't me. It was some people long ago. Well,
but they're benefiting from
you're
it.
Still benefiting from it. So how do you not become responsible? How do you not become responsible? You are responsible still. And they should press their government to do the right thing by people who have been harmed.
Wow. Yes, as I think about that, and as I've traveled throughout the world, one of the things that I noticed, whether it's on the continent of Africa or being in Guyana or going to the Caribbean, there's one thing if places are the tourist destinations, so those places are all built up and beautiful. But when you go to the places where folks in the community live, and you see the long-term devastation of enslavement, of colonialism. And I'm like, how can you be a person who has a soul, that has any sense of humanity, and not connect this to long-term economic oppression?
That's right. And Jamaicans were offended this week when a diplomat from the UK said, well, it's not only slavery why these economies are the way they are, because there are places that had slavery and they're still doing better than places that did not have slavery. Now, why do we need an argument like that now? Why? It's like, it reminds me of the old racist argument which says Black people are hardy and sturdy. They can take, I'm using Jamaica, they can take pressure, right? How dare you say that? And then he continued by saying, well, Britain has no intention of making any payment for dead people. These are not just, but who killed these people anyway? Who created the conditions under which these people were murdered and died because of ill treatment and malnourishment? Who? And how dare you refer to our ancestors as just dead people?
Dead people, right. And they are ancestors, and
Absolutely.
The legacy of ancestors gets passed down. I always think it's really interesting because the folks that have those kind of comments are typically the ones that have benefited from oppressive systems. Even even if they look like a person of color. And I think that has to do a lot with education. And I'm wondering your kind of perspective about that. As a historian, what's the impact of poor historical education and how people think about reparations and just the reparations movement overall?
I think the miseducation is deep. For example, those who argue that Africans must bear the greater responsibility for the trafficking and the manganese, those are miseducated people.
Mm-hmm.
Those are people who don't understand what happened for 500 years to Black people and to indigenous peoples, by the way, and then later on to Asian people who were subjected to what we call deceptive indentureship. So it's not only a movement for African people, but African people, of course, and indigenous people bore the brunt of the assault on our person or spaces. Miseducation is at the root of a lot of myths that are circulating about what happened in the colonial period.
Mm-hmm.
Miseducation causes people not to want to be a republic in the Caribbean. We have several republics. We have Haiti, we have Dominica, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, but the rest of the Caribbean is very reluctant to become a republic because they say the Queen did nothing. Why are we trying to remove the Queen as head of state? And again, that's a lack of history education. I'm going to just show you something quickly. I don't know if your viewers can see this book. This is by
Pull it back towards you for a second. Pull it towards you.
To me. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Britain's Black Debt.
Britain's Black Debt. You see the photo of the Queen Elizabeth II. This is a reigning Queen of England. This is but she's a young queen. Mm-hmm. She's in Barbados on this photo with a planter who is her cousin, visiting a plantation there. The royal family was mixed up, and not just the royal family of Britain, right across Europe. Royal families were involved, many of them, in this huge global economic system.
I thought it was
so miseducation and religious education as well must bear some responsibility for how our children are schooled, how the parents pass on knowledge, the miseducation, because the whole purpose of that kind of education was to build loyalty to Europe, to denigrate blackness, the black skin, even though Garvey said the black skin is not a badge of shame. But that's been instilled. That's why people are bleaching their skins.
Yeah.
Trying to look white, doing everything, because that's how they were educated. And the parents, some of the parents have not corrected this miseducation. So historians are constantly called upon to correct the miseducation.
Talk about the religious education. You just said religious education is part of the issue too.
Yes, because the schools that were established in the Caribbean, I don't know about the United States of America, but many of the schools that were started in the Caribbean were missionary schools, started by missionaries. And I'll give you one example. During the period of chattel enslavement, the field work was done primarily by women, by Black women.
Mm-hmm.
Black women were never treated as if they were women anyway. They were treated as objects to be raped and flogged and worked to death. Now, in the post-slavery period, all of a sudden, the missionaries in the schools began to teach women that they are women, but they are the weaker sex. Now, these are people who were working in the fields before and producing, and they were working. So in the post-slavery period, both the planters and the missionaries tried to teach Black women, you must stay home, and try to get them to buy into the male as a breadwinner ideology and instill sexist and patriarchal and hegemonic masculinity ideologies around those concepts into our people. And we're having a hard time getting rid of it. This thing about man must be head of the household, man must rule, women are the weaker sex, the subordinate sex. And now with education, women are rising, and it's creating problems in many societies, because when you educate a woman, you can't stop that woman from rising and earning money, and many times more money than the man in her life. This creates problems now. So sexism has been carried over, reinscribed, and even the issue of gender-based violence, this is coming back from far. So our education, and a lot of people older than me were not taught Caribbean history. In fact, years ago, when Philip Sherlock tried to introduce something called Caribbean history to the school in which he was at which he was hired, he was told, "Young man, there's no such thing as Caribbean history." So historians have had to try since the 1940s to fashion something called Caribbean history, to say, yes, we have a history. But a lot of people are schooled in Eurocentric history, Eurocentric ideologies. So the miseducation is deep. Even when they brought Asians to the Caribbean to conduct, to engage in contract labor in the aftermath of African enslavement, the missionaries got into gear, the Quakers, the Scottish Presbyterians, to get people away from their culture into a particular kind of culture. So this harm has to be addressed.
Yeah. I saw a comment, and good afternoon, everyone. If you are just joining us, my guest is Dr. Verene Shepherd. She is the director of the Center for Reparations Research at the University of West Indies, and she is based in Jamaica. And her work is really around reparations and looking at CARICOM nations, and so focus on the Caribbean. So if you have comments or questions for Dr. Shepherd, then please put them in the chat, and I would be happy to ask her. I see one comment. Dr. McCrea says, I'm reading Set the World on Fire. And she says the book presents a compelling argument for women's rights activism within the Garveyite movement. And so I think it's interesting when we look at here in the U.S., the ways that we as African Americans have been impacted by folks from the Caribbean. Of course, Marcus Garvey and Amy Jacques Garvey. I mean, there's so many people that we can name. George Padmore, we can
Henry Sylvester Williams,
Wall
Rand, yes.
Yeah, Walter Rodney.
Yes.
They came before Columbus. Ivan Van Sertima. You have so many people that the Caribbean has produced this rich history, and that is despite people saying that the Caribbean doesn't have a history. That's despite the oppression of Britain. So that I think that says a lot about the energy and the nature and really the spirit of folks that are in the Caribbean and that fighting.
Don't forget the University of the West Indies, because as soon as the University of the West Indies was formed, first as a college of the University of London, and then on its own, it's 70 odd years now as the University of the West Indies. As soon as it was established, and as soon as it established a history department on the 3 campuses, the historians started to research and write Caribbean history. Elsa Gavaya, Eric Williams, Walter Rodney, Kamau Brathwaite, the list goes on. Douglas Hall, Lucille Mathurin-Mayer. Lucille Mathurin-Mayer was the first woman to write a full-length thesis on women in the Caribbean, and to uncover that we weren't just beasts of burden, that they were heroes and heroines, not just heroes, but they were heroines who were freedom fighters, and who we many even today. Yes. So most of us grew up knowing about Nana of the Maroons, but there were so many others. You were challenging me to mention some earlier on. There were so many. Now we have so many names. The pity is that we don't have too much biographical information, because the women's names came to us because they were punished, most likely when they were raped, and somebody wrote about it, or they did what they called misdemeanor, and then they were punished, then they were taken to court. That's why we have so many. We have a lot of names, for example, out of the 1831-32 Emancipation War led by Samuel Sharp in Jamaica, the final Emancipation War, because women were flogged, they were imprisoned, some were hanged, some were deported, So that's how we are coming. But that's why we know that the spirit of resistance was strong in the Caribbean. That's why we know they told us, because they left records. Yeah. And we were educated enough to be able to read and go to the archives and find out information.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so as we talk about that energy of resistance, we got to talk about Haiti.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't know, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this, is the fact that after the Haitian folks fought for their freedom and became independent, that France basically extorted them.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Let me just say how much I honor Haiti, what we call Haiti. But the indigenous name for that country, that part of what was called Hispaniola, divided into two countries now, Dominican Republic and what people call Haiti. But the Taino name was Haiti, Ayti. Haiti stands as a beacon of revolution and freedom in the world, because there were other revolutions, but this was the first revolution to truly take back the dignity of Black people. Yes, we had the American War of Independence, but that didn't end enslavement. But the Haitian Revolution ended chattel enslavement in Haiti, and they went on to win their independence in 1804. It was a long war from 1791 right back to 1804, and they defeated a multinational army. Imagine France and her allies defeated by committed Black people who said, we're not going to suffer this anymore. And France, in order to leave for Haiti to be left alone, extracted money. So that's a part of reparation. That's part of the claim as well, because Haiti is a part of CARICOM. And in 1825 is when they started to pay back this money. That was when it was extracted from them. 150 million gold franc Haiti was asked to pay to France in exchange for France and her allies leaving the country alone to try to forge its freedom. Well, how can you forge your freedom and look about your population when you had this thing around your neck? Between 1825 and 1947, that's how long it took for the country to finish paying it. So won its independence, but forced into paying this enormous reparation to French enslavers that it had overthrown. Have you ever heard about the defeated army calling the shots at a peace treaty or a settlement after a war?
No.
The victor normally sets the terms.
Right.
But this is how racism and power works. And so, people say, well, why did they agree to pay? Why did the presidents agree to pay? But they would not have been left alone. And they would have made sure to launch attacks from Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, into Haiti, which is why the Haitians had to go across the Dominican Republic and free the enslaved people over there. So that they wouldn't use that place as a base to re-enter Haiti. So they had to just agree to this ultimatum, because that ultimatum, if they didn't agree, the country would have faced constant intervention, And
do you think that France owes that money back?
Absolutely. Well, remember, President Aristide asked, they call it restitution. They want the restitution of the money paid. It was reduced eventually to 90 million gold francs. But by then they had paid so much, and plus the interest,
Mhm.
because they had to borrow money to pay sometimes, even the first installment, I think they had to borrow from a French bank. So that money has not yet been recovered. But each time that is put on the table, well, we saw what happened to President Aristide in 2004,
Yeah.
the Haitian bicentennial, when he put that on the table,
Mhm.
you know. But we have to support Haiti because its economic woes started from then. It
And
has not had a chance to recover and to rule itself and to be in charge of its destiny. And people keep invading for one excuse, under one pretense or the other, and put the country further and further into economic devastation.
I mean, we see that, just 2 weeks ago with the assassination of the president. So it's always something happening in Haiti. And I think it's really interesting because people will make these negative comments without recognizing things from a historical perspective and even from a psychological perspective. Because what you have to really understand is that the Haitian people, because of their resistance, because that fire in them, have been dealing with the ongoing impact of not just enslavement, but then economic terrorism.
And
That's really,
invasion.
really
Remember, after World War One, during World War One, they were occupied by the United States of America.
mm-hmm.
Because of fear that Germany and others would want to use bases in the Caribbean. So they have had, after the earthquake, so many NGOs came in there under the pretext of helping. I went to Haiti during that time, just after the earthquake and so on. You could hardly, the traffic was so heavy with, SUVs, and you couldn't get a seat in restaurants. With every aid group was there. What has happened to Haiti since then?
Right.
It's a
Well,
question.
the thing that I, as a psychologist, took away from that is one of the things that I noticed is that you had pedophiles, you had sex traffickers that immediately went into Haiti and attempted to take out children. And I was like, you have to really begin to think about just economic devastation and how people will even just try to take vulnerable populations, whether it be children and women, and do harm. So while all these people are showing up and supposedly trying to help, which, we can have a whole conversation about, the supposed, saviors coming and helping, then you still have to think about just these things that can happen, like children being unsafe. And I tell people that all the time. When you have situations like that, you're going to have those people that are going to go in and try to take advantage of situations and harm people even further.
I'm sure there are good people with well-meaning people and well-meaning assistance, but I think on the whole, if you talk to Haitian people themselves, they are still wondering why we're still in the state if all this money was granted by agencies and so on. And then, of course, we have the case of cholera upsurge in the country by some of the peacekeeping troops that came in.
Yeah.
So, but I hate when people say poor Haiti again, or the poorest country in the hemisphere, blah, blah, blah. You need to study history and understand the context of that. Put the blame where it should go and stop oppressing the Haitian people. And by the way, so many of us should have been grateful to that country in the 18th century, because once they got their independence and got their freedom, they declared that any enslaved person who managed through maritime marinage to get to the country of Haiti would be granted freedom and Haitian citizenship.
I didn't know that.
Yes, so much so. There was a boat called the Deep Nine. The enslaved Africans from Jamaica, some of them, left their enslavers stranded on the beach, and took the boat and rode to Haiti. And when they landed there, they were given citizenship and freedom. The enslaver from Jamaica wrote to the president, actually even went there to claim his property. And the president said, property? Oh, see the boat out there. You can take back your boat. That's the only property to which you're entitled. But No one in this country is property. No person is property. So you better go on, bye-bye. Go on your merry way with your boat. You perhaps have to row it yourself because there are no people there are no enslaved people who are going to get back on that boat. So when I see Caribbean people treating Haitians like that, when they're trying to have refuge in our country, we must repay the hospitality. We were the ones, our ancestors were the ones trying to get to Haiti to get freedom from the wicked enslavers in Jamaica and in other parts of the Caribbean. Look how we're treating Haitian people. We should be ashamed of ourselves.
Wow. And that means that you would never know if the folks that are coming from Haiti are actually originally from Jamaica.
Absolutely.
Your ancestors.
But you can tell by the names. You can tell by the English names that some people have, not rather than French names.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I wonder if you know about this. So I was in Paris pre-pandemic. I don't even know now. Right before the pandemic. And I went on a tour with a brother named Kevin Devon. I forget Kevin's last name. And Lou Paris Noir. And so he gives you a tour of Paris from the Black perspective. And one of the things that he told us is that at one point, Haiti was providing 85% of the income to sustain France.
Yes, because it was called the Pearl of the Antilles.
Wow.
It was a very rich country. The enslaved Africans produced at a high level. And that was the same for most countries anyway. Jamaica was, keeping Britain afloat.
Okay.
The Netherlands had Caribbean colonies. They still do, by the way. Britain still has colonies in the Caribbean. They won't let go of some of them, because they're too economically beneficial and important to them, like Bermuda, Anguilla, Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos. So that was the situation for many countries. In fact, I was looking at the figures for the compensation. I don't know if I can find it, but I was looking at this, the wealth of Jamaica in the 18th century. And Richard Sheridan estimated that Jamaica's total wealth in 1775 was 18 million pounds sterling. And his estimate has been revised upwards by Professor Trevor Bernard, who argues that the island's wealth was at 25 million pounds sterling, some 7 million or 39% higher. And that the wealth of Jamaica, the importance of Jamaica to Britain, was higher than for North America. Because it says, when compared to mainland North America, Caribbean planters per capita earnings were significantly greater than their mainland counterparts. And Trevor Bernard argues that the aggregate wealth per white for the British Caribbean was much higher than previous estimates. And he goes on with figures to show, and Barry Higman suggested that Jamaica's productive capacity could be compared to emerging industrial economies at that time. And Eric Williams, of course, backed this up by talking about the way in which, the Caribbean was important to Europeans. So it's no wonder that you would have heard that about the Paris and the role of Haiti in the economic wealth. That's why they fought a 13-year war to keep the country from getting its freedom.
Yeah. I mean, which makes sense. So I want to kind of shift, and I know we're getting towards the end of our time, and I want to talk about this, and I want to kind of give people a warning, because I'm going to ask some of the harder questions that can be emotionally hard to hear, that I want Dr. Shepherd to talk about. So this is a trigger warning. If this is a lot for you, then I want you to shut it off and take care of yourself. I want to talk about, so if you're making that much money and producing at a high level and producing through people that have been enslaved and are forced to work, that means that you have to torture them.
Yeah.
Can you give me examples? There was one example that you really gave in Guyana that blew my mind, and the whole room was like, traumatized.
Well, yes, because if you look at what happened to enslaved women, for example, it breaks your heart. And of course, our enslaved men as well. I'm thinking about Catherine Brown from Cascade Pen. She was owned by a woman called Mrs. Griffiths from a parish called Hanover in Jamaica. And she was accused of having fought a war to end slavery in Jamaica, that war led by Samuel Sharp, who is now a national hero. She was sentenced to death. It was later commuted to 50 lashes. Now, 50 lashes with the cat o' nine. Remember that the cat o' nine really has 9 prongs. That's why it's called the cat o' nine. 50 lashes and 6 weeks imprisonment. Anne James was a free woman, but she participated in the war and she was executed. Elizabeth Samuels from Bunkers Hill in Trelawney, 100 lashes and 6 months in prison. Eliza Whittingham was sentenced to death. Jane Whittingham was sentenced to death. They were probably sisters for all we know. This was what happened to our ancestors. Some of the men were sentenced to 500 lashes. They couldn't survive that. And the majority of the men who were accused of having participated were executed. After the 1760 war, which was led by a Ghanaian chief, Techi, he was a Fanti. 2 of the people who fought with him were put in a cage. And the cages were, placed in a public place in Kingston. In fact, one of the enslaved Africans was called Kingston. One was called Good Luck and one was called Kingston. And they put them up in this cage high above the street and left them to starve and dehydrate. One of them survived 7 days. One survived 14 days. And people actually passed to look at the suffering, but they couldn't take them down. They couldn't cut them down, So when we approach emancipation, August 1, which is around the corner in the Caribbean, that must be our focus. The heroes and heroines who brought us to this place and seek reparatory justice for them. But if we don't know our history, we're going to just keep making these stupid statements about we weren't the ones, no one is alive who suffered. It's too long in the past. It is not too long in the past. The compensation loan that was taken out to pay the planters was only paid off in 2015.
In the UK.
In the UK. Which means that Black people in the UK, their taxes also were used to pay off this loan. Think about that. Almost forced to participate in a crime of which you had no responsibility. This is our history. This is what I have to read every day. This is what I have to teach every day. And I also have to look about my mental state, because there's violence that comes up from the pages in the archives. These pages kept by enslavers, put there. When planters went back to their country's houses in England or Wales or Scotland, they deposited their papers, the evidence of their crime in the Caribbean and elsewhere, in their county archives. I have been to some of these county archives. I studied my PhD at the University of Cambridge. I was able to go around the UK to see. I was in Lincolnshire to see the papers of Thomas Tisloud, who everybody must know about by now, who kept a diary from 1751 to 1786 and cataloged every time he raped a Black woman. This is the violence that we're talking about. So those who say, I'm not joining the reparation movement, it is foolishness. I'm here to say it is your responsibility on behalf of your ancestors. If not to join the reparatory justice movement, not to campaign, not to hold states accountable, is to say, I don't care about my family. My great-great-grandfather, Samuel Mighty, was born into slavery 1829. Okay, Alexander Mighty. It's personal to me, and that's why I do what I do.
How do you keep yourself sane psychologically as you read that? Like, I'm emotional just even listening to you talk about it. So how do you read that level of violence and be okay?
You have to have a good family connection, a good circle of friends, and you have to have some kind of hobby.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
And I think it also a good outlet. I'm a vice chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I go to Geneva 3 times a year. Well, we have to be virtual now because of the pandemic. But I get to look at states and have a discussion with them. That to me is privilege.
Got it.
You know, and I embrace it and I do the best I can on behalf of the people, African people. But I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that they're ever convinced that what they did was wrong. But we Africans have to do something though. Everyone was talking about Black Lives Matter, the globalization of Black Lives Matter. We are mourning, everybody was shedding tears for George Floyd. Everybody was saying all of this is wrong. Colonialism must end. We must have decolonial justice. We watched as statues were taken down, but we have gone back to our comfort level. Why is Columbus still standing in so many countries of the world?
Yes.
Including in the Caribbean. Why? Why is Queen Victoria still standing in a park in downtown Kingston, which is called St. William Grant Park? St. William was a revolutionary trade unionist, labor activist. His statue is not there, even though the park is named after him. But Queen Victoria is there. And Columbus still stands in St. Anne's Bay. What is the matter with us?
Yes. I can't say anything. That is. So I wanted to invite you, and I wanted to invite the people that are listening to a closing exercise. I want us, and this one is in time. I want us to call out the names of women from the Caribbean that were freedom fighters. And so if you are listening, if you want to put something in the chat, I would love for you to do that. I see a couple of them. I will read them. But Dr. Shepherd, I wonder if you can just give us names of some women. I know you gave us some names already, but even if you call those again, of
Yes.
names of Caribbean women freedom fighters that we just want to be able to remember these ancestors and lift them up.
Let me clarify that a freedom fighter is not necessarily somebody who took up a gun.
Yeah.
Okay? We must talk about resistance. Those who harbored enslaved Africans and helped them to freedom. And you know them very well from the United States of America. We're talking about those who spoke back and who destabilized the economy. And I'll give you, this is one of my girls, Juanica.
Juanica. I love the name, Juanica.
In 1816, the planter Matthew Gregory Lewis introduced his readers to Miss Juanica. He said, every morning my agent regales me with some fresh instance of insubordination. Read resistance. It seems this morning the women, one and all, refused to carry out the trash. And that without the slightest pretense. In other words, they're just in your face and say, me not carry out the trash. In consequence, the mill was obliged to be stopped. That's the cane mill, the crushing mill. And when the driver on that station insisted on their doing their duty and go back to work and restart the mill, a little fierce young devil, a Miss Juanica, flew at his throat and endeavored to strangle him. The agent was obliged to be called in, and at length this petticoat rebellion was subdued. Miss Juanica.
Miss Juanica.
Miss Juanica, 1816, the very year when Nanny Grigg from Barbados, who's another freedom fighter, was fighting that 1816 war along with Bussa in Barbados. I already read you the names of those who were punished for fighting with Sam Sharp: Catherine Brown, Catherine Clark, Ann James, Christina James, Mary Fowler, Elizabeth Samuels, Rosanna, Charlotte Reed, Eliza, and Jane Whittingham. But we have more. We have Marianne Reed. I love Marianne Reed. Marianne Reed was one of those enslaved women who were allowed to operate a kind of boarding house. And she would have what Jamaicans call bashment or party, you know. But beneath where that party was going on, enslaved Africans were harbored to plot wars. And that's where they plotted the 1824 war in Jamaica. So Marianne Reed, call her name, you know.
Oh, I see names in the chat. Miss Louise Bennett Coverly. We lift up her up. Amy Ashwood Garvey. I didn't say her. Yeah.
But we know these more modern women, Mary Morris Nib, Amy Jacques Garvey, Amy Ashwood Garvey. We know those, you know. But we have to talk about the Maroon women, and not just from Jamaica, because we know none of the Maroons, but we have to talk about Betta Douglas of St. Kitts. We have to talk about Antiguan women such as Joan, Betty, and Sarah. Those who stowed away on boats, you know, and of course, I like what Harriet Jacobs said, because when people begin to think about, so where did these women get the nerve to do what they did, you know?
Yes.
Harriet Jacobs said, "My master had power and law on his side. I had a determined will. There is might in each."
I love Harriet Jacobs. Yes. I see in the chat, I see Claudia Jones and Alicia Jones.
Yes. Yes. Those are some of our women. And we have Sally Bassett from Bermuda. She was burnt at the stake because she attempted to poison. They said she attempted to poison or enslave her. She denied it. We have one Tete Loke from St. Martin. One Tete. Tete in French, they tell me is breast. So in Jamaica, we say titi, but it's breast. So she was a Maroon, and she ran away. When they caught her, they cut off one of her breasts. So they called her one Tete Loke. And there is also, you know, Taino and Taina women. You have Solitude from Guadeloupe. I've been trying to get the names of women from across the region, you know, just to show that it was one protracted war of liberation. There was never a generation of enslaved Africans who never tried to break out for freedom. From 1687, Professor Beckers just wrote a book on King Coffee of Barbados, you know, King Coffee, because they were planning to take over the country and make him their Santehine, you know, and stool him. And it's a similar thing that Chief Techi from Jamaica wanted to do. But almost every year you had some plot or break for freedom by our enslaved Africans. 1687 Barbados, 1692 Barbados, 1730s the Maroon Wars in Antigua, 1737, Jamaica 1760, Berbice 1763. Then you have the Haitian Revolution, you have the 1860 war in Barbados, 1823 Demerara, 1824 with Miss Marianne Reed, I helped them to plot it in Jamaica, 1831 Antigua Barbuda, and then the final one now, the 1831-32 Emancipation War in Jamaica. There's a monument with all the names of those who we have found who participated in that war. And that monument with all the names and the enslavers who claimed these ancestors. It's in Montego Bay. So anyone who comes to Montego Bay, in the square there, they should go and at the Civic Center where people were hanged, and look at that monument. I think it's very important to pay respect, because, you know, we're all suffering from this post-slavery traumatic syndrome, as Joy DeGruy rights.
Talked about that.
And
Yeah.
others, yes. So we have to find some way to say thanks, though, because look at us now, you know, and we need to give thanks for where we are.
I see another name in the chat, Jane and Paulette Nardal. I think it is Nardal. I think it's Nardal. Okay. Dr. Verene Shepherd, director of the Center for Research on Reparations Research, and an amazing scholar and warrior. Keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as I go, just remember the CARICOM 10-point action plan, which is a blueprint for reparation, for full formal apology, Indigenous Peoples Development Program, repatriation for those who choose it, the building of cultural institutions, attention to the public health crisis, illiteracy eradication or education, African knowledge program, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, and debt cancellation. Those are all, that's our claim.
And I love how the apology, and I've heard you talk about this before, I love how the apology is number one. You got to start off the rip, acknowledge what you did, and apologize.
But if you refuse to apologize, we ain't waiting on it. We're carrying on the fight.
Dr. Shepherd,
thanks for having me.
Yes. Everyone, thank you for hanging out with us today. Thank you for participating. I see your comments and just want to acknowledge you. We are here every Friday having these conversations, and I see thank yous that are coming in. People are saying thank you to you, Dr. Shepherd, and saying that your words were healing. And so this is an important conversation. We need to continue to have this conversation with our brothers and sisters throughout the African diaspora. And so I hope that you hang out with us every Friday. I am here at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Take care.